The click of a thumb safety disengaging sounds exactly like a Snapple cap popping. Leora knew this because the barrel of a service weapon was currently vibrating against her driver's side window. She wasn't seeing her life flash before her eyes. She was just intensely annoyed she had left her favorite pen at the courthouse. The interior of Leora's sedan smelled of dry-cleaned wool, stale peppermint, and the faint metallic hum of the heater working overtime. Late at night, the windshield wipers dragged across the glass with a dry, rubbery stutter that grated against her exhausted nerves. She had spent many long hours in a windowless mediation room arguing with opposing counsel over the valuation of a contested commercial property. Her brain felt like a wrung-out sponge, capable only of tracking the broken white lines of the highway stretching back into the city limits. When the cherry and blue lights flared in her rearview mirror, the response in her body was chemical and immediate. A cold rush of adrenaline dumped into her stomach. Her foot snapped off the accelerator. She checked her speedometer. 42 in a 35. A speed trap. Typical for the end of the month on this desolate stretch of the Industrial Parkway. She hit her turn signal, the rhythmic tick-tick loud in the quiet cab, and eased onto the gravel shoulder. The crunch of tires on loose stone vibrated up through the steering column. Leora shifted into park, turned off the radio, and let out a long, shuddering exhale. She didn't feel righteous anger or systemic dread in that first second. She just felt a bone-deep, heavy irritation. She had to pee. Her left shoe was pinching her heel. She just wanted to go to sleep. She rolled down the window. The damp, frigid air rushed in. Carrying the sour smell of wet decay from the nearby drainage ditch mixed with the sharp tang of exhaust. In the side mirror, the silhouette of the patrol car idled aggressively close. The driver's side door popped open. Heavy boots hit the wet asphalt. Crunch, squelch, crunch. Leora placed her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The leather cover felt tacky against her suddenly damp palms. The officer walked up the side of her car, lingering near the trunk to press his thumb against the tail light, a procedural habit left over from decades past. The beam of his flashlight cut through the dark, blindingly bright. It swept over the back seats, lingered on the floorboards, and finally hit Leora squarely in the face. She squinted, turning her head slightly away from the harsh white glare. "License? Registration? Proof of insurance?" a voice demanded. It was a young voice, tight with an artificial authority that felt unearned and abrasive. "Evening, officer," Leora said. Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat, hating the weakness in the sound. "They're in my bag on the passenger seat. I didn't ask where they were. I asked for them," the officer snapped. The flashlight beam dropped slightly, illuminating the silver nameplate on his tactical vest. R. Harlan. Leora swallowed the dry lump in her throat. Her eyes shifted to her leather tote bag slumped sideways on the passenger seat. The zipper was closed. "Okay," she said, her voice dropping an octave, trying to project the calm, measured tone she used when cross-examining hostile witnesses. "I'm going to reach over to my bag. I have to unzip it to get my wallet." "Just get the ID," Harlan snapped, his tone elevating. Leora moved her right hand off the steering wheel. She leaned slightly to the right, extending her arm toward the heavy leather tote. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of the zipper. "Hey, keep your hands where I can see them." The shout was so loud, so violently sudden, that Leora physically flinched. Her shoulder jerked up toward her ear. She froze, arm suspended over the center console. The air in the car seemed to turn to solid ice. "I'm opening the bag," Leora said, her voice rising now, threaded with a thin, reedy panic she couldn't suppress. The professional facade was cracking. Her heart was suddenly hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I said keep your hands on the wheel. Don't reach for anything," Harlan yelled. "You just asked for my license," Leora yelled back. A fatal mistake of logic in a moment entirely devoid of it. The beam of the flashlight jerked wildly. Leora heard the rustle of heavy nylon, the scrape of kydex, and then that hollow, terrifying pop of a thumb safety. A heavy matte black piece of metal was suddenly resting on the rubber weather stripping of her open window. It was pointed directly at the center of her chest. Leora stopped breathing. The world reduced to a pinpoint. The smell of the wet asphalt vanished. The sound of her own heartbeat vanished. There was only the cavernous black hole of the barrel a few feet from her sternum. It looked massive. It looked impossibly, absurdly real. She wasn't a hero in a movie. She wasn't calculating her next move. Her bladder tightened painfully. A cold, humiliating sweat broke out across her forehead. Her left eyelid began to twitch. "Hands on the wheel!" Harlan screamed, his voice breaking into a high-pitched adolescent crack. He was terrified. That realization was worse than the gun itself. A calm cop with a gun was a threat. A terrified cop with a gun was a live grenade. Leora moved her right hand back to the steering wheel in agonizing slow motion. Every millimeter felt like navigating a minefield. Her knuckles bumped against the plastic horn, a microscopic sound that felt deafening. She gripped the wheel. She was shaking. Violent, uncontrollable tremors traveled up her arms and into her shoulders. "My hands are on the wheel," she whispered. Her lips were numb. "Don't you move! Do not move!" Harlan was panting. She could smell him now, a sour, acrid scent of nervous sweat cutting through the cold night. The gun barrel shook, tapping a frantic metallic rhythm against the edge of the glass. The silence in the car stretched out thick and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, ragged sound of Harlan breathing heavily just outside the window. Leora's eyes remained locked on the gun. It was a Glock. She knew that from a dozen police misconduct depositions, staring at photographs of evidence spread across sterile conference tables. It was different when the weapon wasn't a glossy 8x10 print. It was heavy, worn at the edges where it rubbed against the holster, and held by a hand wrapped in tight black leather gloves. "Officer," Leora said. Her voice sounded foreign to her, thin, reedy, vibrating with a desperate need to survive the next 30 seconds. "I am not moving." "Shut up! Shut up and keep your hands visible!" Harlan shouted, the flashlight in his left hand dancing erratically across her dashboard. The beam caught the dust motes hovering in the stale air. Leora's mind was fracturing into two distinct pieces. One was the primal, terrified animal trapped in a metal box, acutely aware that a twitch, a sneeze, or a misunderstood shadow could end her life on the side of a forgotten industrial road. The other was the cold, analytical litigator, the woman who spent her days dismantling fragile egos in municipal court. The lawyer was screaming at her to establish a record, to change the dynamic, to shatter the anonymity of the moment. She knew this script. She knew how it ended when the power dynamic remained unchallenged. She was a black woman in a dark car on an empty road with a panicked cop. Her law degree was currently stuffed in a drawer at home. It offered no bulletproof shielding here. Her eyes darted to the right, a microscopic shift. Mounted to the air vent next to the steering wheel was her phone. The screen had gone dark, but she knew exactly what was on it. Not long ago, as she walked to her car, she had received a text from Elias Thorne. Thorne wasn't just a friend. He was her client, and he was the newly elected mayor of the city. He had texted her about a zoning lawsuit the city was fighting against a massive corporate developer, a lawsuit Leora was leading. She needed a witness. She needed the highest authority she could summon to pull this cop out of his tunnel vision. Leora took a breath. It rattled in her chest. "Officer Harlan," she said, forcing herself to use his name. "Make him human. Make yourself human." I said shut up. I am going to press a button on my phone, Leora said, speaking with agonizing robotic clarity. She ignored his command. The defiance made her stomach turn over, but she pushed through the nausea. It is mounted on the vent right next to my hand. I am not reaching into a bag. Do not touch that phone. I swear to God. Do not move your hands. The barrel of the gun pressed harder against the windowsill, scraping the rubber. Leora didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If she let the standoff continue, his panic would eventually pull the trigger. She extended her right pinky finger, keeping the rest of her hand clamped tight around the steering wheel. The movement was small, absurd, like she was holding a delicate teacup. I am activating the voice command, Leora said softly. She tapped the screen. It lit up, casting a soft blue glow over her terrified, sweating face. She held the home button. A chime sounded in the quiet car. Call Elias Thorne, Leora commanded the phone. Hey, turn that off! Put your hands back! Harlan yelled, taking a half step back, clearly confused by the deviation from the script. He expected panic, begging, or aggression. He did not expect administrative multitasking. The phone began to ring through the car's Bluetooth speakers. The low, resonant sound filled the cabin, suddenly making the space feel like a conference room rather than an execution chamber. Ring. The barrel of the gun drifted a fraction of an inch off the glass. Harlan was staring at the glowing screen of the phone, his breathing still jagged, but his eyes darting. Ring! Hang up the phone, Harlan demanded. But the sharp edge of absolute authority had slightly dulled into confusion. On the third ring, the line clicked open. Leora, it's late. Tell me you aren't still at the office looking at those blueprints. Elias Thorne's voice was warm, gravelly, and undeniably relaxed. In the background, Leora could hear the faint clinking of silverware and the low murmur of a television. Leora squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second. Relief hit her so hard she almost sobbed, but she bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Elias, Leora said, her voice projecting clearly over the car's speakers. She didn't use the title mayor. She used his first name, establishing intimacy, establishing power. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am at the corner of Elm and 4th near the old textile plant. I have been pulled over. Okay. Thorne's voice shifted instantly, the warmth vanishing, replaced by the sharp alertness of a politician smelling a crisis. Are you all right? No, Leora said flatly. She opened her eyes and looked directly past the glaring flashlight into the shadowed face of Officer Harlan. I have my hands on the steering wheel. I have made no sudden movements, but the officer currently standing at my window has his service weapon drawn, unholstered, and pointed at my chest. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Outside the car, Harlan froze. The heavy breathing stopped. The hand holding the flashlight dropped a few inches. He is demanding my ID, which is in my bag, Leora continued, her voice gaining strength, the lawyer taking over from the frightened animal. But he is threatening to shoot me if I move my hands to get it. I am calling you so there is a live, recorded witness to whatever happens next. Thorne's voice was low, vibrating with a sudden, localized fury. What is the officer's name? Leora stared at the silver plate on the tactical vest. Officer R. Harlan. Put me on speaker, Thorne said. You're on the car's Bluetooth, Elias. He can hear you. A heavy sigh echoed through the car speakers. Officer Harlan. The voice of the mayor of the city boomed through the sedan's sound system. This is Mayor Elias Thorne. I suggest you holster your weapon immediately. Take a very deep breath and step back from Ms. Kane's vehicle. Harlan looked like he had been struck by lightning. The aggression melted off him, replaced instantly by the pale, clammy reality of a career imploding in real time. He looked from the glowing dashboard to Leora's face, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The heavy black gun, which a moment ago had been an instrument of absolute power, suddenly looked like an anvil he was desperate to drop. The withdrawal of the weapon was not a smooth, professional motion. It was jagged. The Glock scraped against the hard rubber of Leora's window frame, a sickening, abrasive friction that made her teeth ache. Officer Harlan took a half-step backward, his boot sliding awkwardly on the loose gravel. He lowered the gun, but didn't holster it immediately. It hung at his side, a heavy, lethal weight dragging down his right arm. "As she was reaching," Harlan stammered. His voice was entirely stripped of the abrasive authority he had wielded only minutes prior. He sounded like a teenager caught in a lie. He was speaking to the glowing rectangle of the phone on the dashboard, completely ignoring Leora. She made a furtive movement toward the passenger seat. "I am perfectly still," Leora said. Her voice was a dry croak. She swallowed hard, trying to force moisture back into her throat. "My hands are at 10 and 2, Officer Harlan." Mayor Thorne's voice cut through the damp air, sharp and utterly devoid of sympathy. The Bluetooth speaker gave his baritone an artificial booming quality. "Holster your weapon now. Confirm when you have done so." Leora watched Harlan's chest heave under his Kevlar vest. The flashlight in his left hand aimed at the asphalt, casting long, distorted shadows of his legs across the wet road. He hesitated. It was a terrifying, infinite decimal pause where his ego battled his survival instinct. To holster the weapon was to admit he was wrong. To admit he was wrong was to admit that he had nearly committed murder over a traffic infraction. Slowly, his right hand moved to his hip. The rigid Kydex holster snapped loudly as the gun slid back into place. "Click. It's secured," Harlan mumbled, running his gloved hand over his mouth. He looked sick. The pale, waxy sheen of sheer panic coated his face. "Step away from the vehicle. Go stand at the front of your cruiser," Thorne ordered. Harlan didn't argue. He turned and walked back toward the flashing cherry and blue lights of his patrol car. He didn't look at Leora again. He leaned against the push bumper of his cruiser, head bowed, reaching up to key the radio mic on his shoulder. In the cab of her sedan, Leora was suddenly, violently alone. The immediate threat was gone, and in its absence, her body realized what it had just endured. The dam broke. A violent tremor started in her knees and shot upward, seizing her entire torso. She pulled her hands off the steering wheel. They were cramped into claws, the joints screaming from how hard she had gripped the leather. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs, but her legs were shaking so hard her hands bounced. Her breathing turned into short, shallow gasps. The edges of her vision blurred, narrowing into a dark tunnel. "Leora!" The voice from the dashboard was softer now. "Leora, talk to me. Is he away from the car?" She couldn't answer. A wave of nausea hit her with the force of a physical blow. She unclipped her seatbelt with clumsy, numb fingers, threw open the driver's side door, and leaned out into the freezing air. She didn't throw up, but she dry-heaved, a harsh, tearing sound that echoed off the wet concrete of the drainage ditch. She gagged, spitting a mouthful of bitter saliva onto the pavement. The cold wind hit the sweat on her neck, making her shiver violently. She pulled herself back into the car, pulling the door shut but leaving the window down. She rested her forehead against the cold rim of the steering wheel. The leather smelled faintly of her hand lotion and the sharp metallic taint of fear sweat. "Leora," Thorne repeated. There was a tight edge of alarm in his voice. "I have dispatch on my other line. I have a supervisor and 2 additional units heading to your location right now. Are you injured?" "No," she managed to say. Her teeth were chattering. She clamped her jaw shut. "No, I'm not hurt." "Okay, just breathe. You did exactly what you needed to do." Leora squeezed her eyes shut. A hot, angry tear leaked out, cutting a warm path down her freezing cheek. She wiped it away furiously with the back of her hand. She hated the tears. She hated the shaking. Most of all, she hated the profound, humiliating helplessness of those final minutes. She was 34 years old. She was a partner at a mid-sized corporate firm. She wore a wool coat that cost more than this cop made in a month. She had spent a decade building a life designed specifically to insulate her from the blunt, brutal edges of the world. She knew the law better than the man holding the gun, and none of it had mattered. The armor was paper thin. A badge, a gun, and a bad mood had been enough to strip it all away in seconds. If she hadn't had Elias Thorne's personal cell phone number, how would this have ended? She pictured her own body slumped over the center console. She pictured the police union press release the next morning. Furtive movement. Refused commands. Officer feared for his life. She pictured her mother watching the evening news. A dark, corrosive anger began to coil in her stomach, pushing back the nausea. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a fight. It was a cold, cynical rage. He was terrified, Elias, Leora said, her voice dropping into a flat, deadpan register. She lifted her head and stared out the rearview mirror. Harlan was still leaning against his cruiser, talking frantically into his radio. He was more scared than I was. That's the part they don't tell you. They give a gun to a kid who's terrified of his own shadow, and they put him in the dark. I know, Thorne said quietly. The politician was gone. He just sounded tired. We'll handle him. I promise you that. Will you? Leora asked, the litigator's skepticism bleeding through her shock. Or will he get 3 weeks of paid administrative leave and some retraining modules? Before Thorne could answer, the wail of approaching sirens bled through the night air. Within seconds, the desolate stretch of road was bathed in an aggressive, blinding wash of flashing lights. 2 more cruisers tore around the bend, their tires squealing as they braked hard on the gravel shoulder, boxing in both Leora's sedan and Harlan's patrol car. The cavalry had arrived. Leora took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of damp earth and fresh tire rubber. She reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror, checking her reflection. Her eyes were red. Her hair was slightly mussed. She smoothed it back, took another ragged breath, and forced her face into a mask of absolute, impenetrable stone. The arrival of the backup units entirely changed the atmospheric pressure on the side of the road. It shifted from an isolated, volatile standoff into a heavily managed crime scene, though Leora was acutely aware she was both the victim and the primary suspect in the eyes of the institution now surrounding her. 4 heavy doors slammed in rapid succession. The heavy thud vibrated through the floorboards of her sedan. Men in heavy dark jackets spilled out into the glare of the headlights. Leora didn't move. Her hands remained on the steering wheel. She watched them through the side mirror. 2 officers flanked Harlan, talking to him in low, rapid murmurs. Harlan was gesturing wildly, pointing toward Leora's car, then pointing at his own holster. A 4th man broke away from the group and walked toward her. He was older, heavy-set, moving with the stiff, rolling gait of a man who had worn 20 pounds of gear on his waist for 3 decades. He didn't use a flashlight to blind her. He kept his hands hooked loosely into his duty belt, nowhere near his weapon. As he stepped into the pool of light spilling from her open window, Leora read the gold chevrons on his sleeve and the nameplate on his chest. Sergeant Malcolm Holt. He smelled like stale black coffee and wintergreen chewing gum. "Ms. Kane?" Holt asked. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble designed to project calm. It was a practiced, weaponized de-escalation tone. "I'm Sergeant Holt. Are you doing all right, ma'am?" "I am currently sitting in my vehicle, Sergeant," Leora replied. Her voice was steady now. The shaking had retreated deep into her core, leaving her exterior cold and rigid. I was stopped for allegedly doing 42 in a 35. Your officer drew his service weapon, pointed it at my chest, and threatened to shoot me when I attempted to retrieve my license at his command. Holt didn't blink. His thick, graying eyebrows drew together in a look of deep, manufactured concern. Yes, ma'am. That's a very serious allegation. We're going to get to the bottom of it. I need you to just— It is not an allegation, Leora interrupted, her tone slicing through his placating rumble. She tapped the glowing screen of her phone, which was still connected to the Bluetooth. Mayor Thorne has been on the line for the last 10 minutes. He heard the entire exchange. Holt's eyes flicked toward the dashboard. A muscle in his jaw feathered. The practiced calm fractured just enough to reveal the intense bureaucratic headache pounding behind his eyes. "Sergeant Holt!" The mayor's voice echoed through the car. Holt stiffened. He actually stood a little straighter, a reflex ingrained by years of chain-of-command conditioning. "Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I expect Officer Harlan to be relieved of his weapon and his badge tonight, Sergeant," Thorne said. There was no political finesse in the demand. "I expect a full incident report on my desk by morning, and I expect Ms. Kane to be treated with the utmost respect." "We are handling the situation according to department protocol, sir," Holt said. It was a non-answer, the standard shield of the mid-level manager protecting the hive. "Handle it better," Thorne snapped. "Leora, do you need me to come down there?" Leora looked at Holt. The sergeant's eyes were guarded, assessing her not as a citizen in distress, but as a massive liability. She hated the dynamic. She hated that Thorne was her shield. It felt dirty, an exertion of privilege that highlighted the terrifying vulnerability of everyone who didn't have the mayor on speed dial. "No, Elias, I want to go home," Leora said. "Sergeant Holt is going to process this traffic stop right now so I can leave." "Ms. Kane," Holt started, clearing his throat. "Given the nature of the incident, I'd like to ask you to step out of the vehicle so we can take a preliminary statement." "No!" Leora's refusal was instantaneous and hard. Holt frowned. "Ma'am, standard procedure when a weapon is drawn. Standard procedure dictates that you secure a scene." Leora fired back, the litigator fully asserting control. "Your scene is secure. I am not under arrest. You have no reasonable articulable suspicion that I am committing a crime. You pulled me over for a traffic infraction. You may issue me a citation or you may let me go. But I am not stepping out of this vehicle into the dark with 4 armed officers after one of you just threatened my life." Holt opened his mouth to argue, but the Bluetooth speaker clicked. "Sergeant," Thorne warned, just one word, heavy with implication. Holt's jaw tightened. He looked back at Harlan, who was currently leaning against a cruiser, head down, flanked by Union reps in uniform. The blue wall was already forming, isolating the threat, circling the wagons. Holt looked back at Leora. He saw the cold, furious intelligence in her eyes. He knew he was outgunned. "All right," Holt said, exhaling a long breath that smelled of wintergreen. "No citation will be issued tonight, Ms. Kane. You are free to go." Leora didn't feel a rush of victory. She felt a sickening plunge in her stomach. "You're letting me go?" "Yes, ma'am. You're free to leave." "And him?" Leora pointed a shaking finger at the rearview mirror. "Does he get to go back on patrol tomorrow?" "That is an internal personnel matter, Ms. Kane. There will be an investigation." Holt's face was a stone mask. He was shutting her out. The system was resetting itself. Leora stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. The cold air rushing through the window felt heavy and suffocating. She reached over to the passenger seat, unzipped her leather tote, and pulled out her wallet. She extracted her driver's license and held it out the window. "Take it," Leora demanded. Holt looked confused. "I said you're free to go, ma'am." "Take my ID, Sergeant. Run it through your system. Log it into the dispatch record," Leora said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. I want a digital footprint that I was here at this exact time. I want it on the official record that I was pulled over, because if you let me drive away without logging this, by tomorrow morning, this stop never happened. Officer Harlan just had a misunderstanding in an empty parking lot. Holt stared at the plastic card pinched between her fingers. He knew exactly what she was doing. She was handcuffing the department to the truth. Reluctantly, he reached out and took the license. His thick fingers brushed hers. They were warm. Hers were like ice. "I'll be right back, Ms. Kane," Holt said quietly. He walked back to his cruiser. Leora sat in the dark, the engine humming beneath her, the heater blowing uselessly against the freezing air pouring in the window. "Leora," Thorne said softly from the phone. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she lied, staring at the flashing lights painting the wet asphalt in rhythmic, bloody strokes. "I just want my pen back. I left my favorite pen at the courthouse." She leaned her head back against the headrest, closed her eyes, and finally let the darkness swallow her. Sergeant Holt emerged from the blinding halo of the cruiser's headlights. He walked slower this time, the heavy rolling gait replaced by a deliberate, measured tread. He stopped at Leora's window, keeping a careful 2 feet of distance between his belt and her door panel. He held out her driver's license. The plastic was pinched between his thick thumb and forefinger. Leora took it. The card was warm from his hand, a brief, intimate transfer of heat that made her skin crawl. She slid it back into the leather slot of her wallet without looking at it. "Dispatch has logged the stop, Ms. Kane," Holt said. His voice was entirely flat, stripped of the weaponized calm from earlier. It was the voice of a man doing a job he suddenly despised. "A record exists. There is no citation. You are clear to leave the scene." "Thank you, Sergeant," Leora said. Her voice matched his, dead and hollow. Holt didn't tell her to have a good night. He didn't offer a hollow apology. He just turned and walked back toward his vehicle. Leora watched in the side mirror as the 4 officers congregated briefly by the push bumpers. There was no laughing, no casual debrief. They moved with a rigid, hurried efficiency. Doors slammed. Engines revved. The 2 backup cruisers killed their flashing lights, plunging the road back into the oppressive, damp dark. They pulled out in tight formation, tires chewing the gravel, and sped off toward the highway. Harlan's car remained for a few seconds longer. Leora saw his silhouette behind the steering wheel, a dark shape, entirely motionless. Then he shifted into gear and pulled away, heading in the opposite direction. Leora was alone. The silence rushed back in, broken only by the rhythmic stutter of her windshield wipers dragging across dry glass. She reached out and snapped them off. The sudden absence of the rubbery squeak was a physical relief. She put the car in drive. Her foot hovered over the accelerator. Her right leg was vibrating. A fine, high-frequency tremor she couldn't suppress. She pressed the pedal. The sedan rolled forward, the tires crunching off the shoulder and back onto the wet asphalt. She drove exactly 35 miles per hour. Her eyes darted constantly to the rearview mirror, tracking every pair of headlights that appeared in the distance, waiting for the cherry and blue strobe to ignite again. Her chest felt tight, bound in iron bands. The heater was finally blasting hot air, smelling of dusty coils and melted plastic. But she couldn't stop shivering. It took a while to reach her neighborhood. It was an upscale, heavily gentrified enclave of restored brownstones and manicured sidewalks. It was the kind of neighborhood where people left Amazon packages on their porches for 3 days without fear. It was the neighborhood Leora had worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to afford. She pulled into her designated parking spot behind her building. She turned off the ignition. The engine ticked as it cooled. Leora didn't move. She sat in the dark for several minutes, staring at the brick wall in front of her car. The adrenaline was finally leaving her bloodstream, draining away, and leaving behind a hollow, toxic exhaustion. Her jaw ached. She reached up and massaged her masseter muscles, realizing she had been grinding her teeth so hard her gums throbbed. She grabbed her tote bag, her keys, and her phone. The phone screen was dark. The call with Thorne had ended somewhere along the drive. She locked the car, the heavy European thunk of the locks echoing in the quiet alley. Her apartment smelled like lavender diffuser oil and expensive, unread hardcovers. It was a sterile, beautiful space. Leora dropped her bag on the entryway table. The heavy thud sounded deafening. She walked into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and let the water run until it was ice cold. She filled a glass and drank it in 3 long swallows. It hit her empty stomach like a stone. She leaned over the sink, bracing her weight on the cool marble countertop. She closed her eyes. The image of the gun barrel flared behind her eyelids. It wasn't a memory. It was a physical sensation. She could feel the violent displacement of air when Harlan yelled. She could smell his sour, terrified sweat. Her stomach violently contracted. Leora dropped the glass into the sink. It didn't break, but it clattered loudly. She gripped the edge of the counter, dry heaving into the stainless steel basin. Nothing came up but a string of bitter, metallic saliva. She coughed, spitting, tears prickling the corners of her eyes. She turned on the water to wash it away, staring blindly at the swirling drain. She wasn't an activist. She wasn't a civil rights attorney. She handled corporate mergers, zoning disputes, and contract arbitrations. She liked quiet rooms, expensive coffee, and arguments governed by predictable, binding rules. She had spent her entire adult life building a fortress of respectability, wealth, and education, and a 20-something kid with a badge and a panic problem had almost blown a hole through it for 42 in a 35. Her phone buzzed against the marble counter. The vibration rattled loudly. Leora wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and picked it up. Elias Thorne. She swiped to answer, bringing the cold glass to her ear. Elias, you home? His voice was thick with fatigue. The politician was gone again. He sounded like the man she occasionally drank scotch with after a brutal city council meeting. I'm in my kitchen. Are you okay? I'm alive, Elias. Let's not stretch the definition of okay to tonight. He let out a heavy breath. I called the chief of police. Woke him up. Holt filed the incident report from his cruiser 10 minutes ago. Harlan has been stripped of his service weapon. He's on desk duty pending a preliminary internal affairs review. Leora let out a short, humorless laugh. It sounded like a bark. Desk duty. So he gets to file paperwork tomorrow morning. It's step 1, Leora. The union is already involved. They've got their reps pulling Harlan into a room right now to get his story straight. By tomorrow, they'll have a statement about a high-stress encounter and perceived threats. I need to know how far you want to push this. Leora closed her eyes. The exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. I don't want to push anything, Elias. I want to go to sleep. I want to go to work tomorrow and depose a real estate developer. You know you can't just let it go, Thorne said quietly. If you let it go, he stays on the street. If he stays on the street, the next person he pulls over might not have the mayor on speakerphone. Don't put that on me, Leora snapped, her voice suddenly sharp, echoing off the tile. Do not put the moral weight of this city's broken police department on my shoulders. I was the victim tonight. I am not your political battering ram. I'm not asking you to be, Thorne said gently. I'm asking you to be my lawyer. Leora opened her eyes, staring at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. She looked exhausted, her hair frizzy at the edges, her eyes dark and hollow. Tomorrow, Elias, Leora said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I will be a lawyer tomorrow. Tonight I just need to be someone who survived. She hung up before he could answer. The morning light was offensive. It sliced through the gap in Leora's heavy blackout curtains, a sharp, unyielding beam of white that landed directly across her pillow. She opened her eyes, and the dull, throbbing headache she had gone to sleep with flared into a sharp, localized spike behind her right temple. She rolled over, groaning, as the muscles in her neck and shoulders protested. They were locked tight, burning with the lactic acid of sustained, terrifying tension. She felt like she had been rear-ended by a truck. The alarm on her phone wasn't set to go off for another 15 minutes, but the idea of lying in the tangled sheets was intolerable. Leora forced herself out of bed. The hardwood floor was cold against her bare feet. She walked into the bathroom and turned the shower on as hot as it would go, waiting for the steam to fog the large mirror. She didn't want to look at herself. She didn't want to see the lingering traces of the terrified woman from the side of the highway. She stood under the scalding water for 20 minutes, letting it beat down on the tight knots in her back. The smell of eucalyptus body wash filled the small space, a sharp, clean scent that helped push away the phantom stench of Harlan's sweat and wet asphalt. By mid-morning, she was in the back of an Uber, heading downtown. She had decided against driving. The thought of gripping a steering wheel made her stomach turn over. She sat in the back seat wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a silk blouse, her armor firmly back in place. She stared out the window, watching the city wake up. A patrol car rolled past them in the opposite direction. The officer behind the wheel was drinking from a white paper cup, looking bored. Leora's heart rate spiked. A cold sweat broke out along her hairline. Her hand drifted instinctively toward her leather tote bag, her fingers brushing the zipper. She forced her hand back to her lap, digging her nails into her palms until the pain grounded her. The patrol car disappeared around a corner. She wasn't safe. The realization was a cold, hard pill sitting in the back of her throat. The expensive suit, the corner office, the six-figure salary. None of it was a shield. It was a costume, and yesterday someone had violently ripped it off. Her law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel tower in the financial district. Stepping off the elevator, Leora was hit by the familiar, comforting smells of the environment: floor wax, fresh espresso, and ozone from the heavy-duty copiers. "Morning, Leora," her assistant, a bright-eyed 24-year-old named Rowan, greeted her from his desk. "I put the Anderson files on your desk. Opposing counsel sent over a revised settlement offer at 3 a.m. Oh, and Mayor Thorne's office called twice. They want you down at City Hall by late morning." Leora stopped walking. She looked at Rowan. He was holding a stack of pink message slips, oblivious to the fact that his boss had nearly been executed on a gravel shoulder only hours earlier. "Tell the mayor's office I have a deposition scheduled for later this morning, and I will be there at noon," Leora said, her voice perfectly level. "And hold all my other calls until then." "You got it," Rowan chirped, already turning back to his monitors. Leora walked into her office and shut the heavy oak door. The click of the latch was profoundly satisfying. She dropped her bag on the leather sofa, walked over to her massive mahogany desk, and sat down. The Anderson files were neatly stacked in the center of her blotter. Millions of dollars were riding on the outcome of the dispute. Yesterday, it had been the most important thing in her life. Today, it looked like a stack of meaningless paper. Her desk phone buzzed, the internal intercom line. She pressed the speaker button. "Yes, Rowan." "Leora, sorry to interrupt. Grant is asking if you have 5 minutes. He says it's urgent." Grant was the managing partner. He didn't ask for 5 minutes unless money was hemorrhaging or a client was threatening to walk. "Send him in." A moment later, the door opened. Grant was a tall, silver-haired man who possessed a supernatural ability to look simultaneously relaxed and deeply menacing. He didn't sit down. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it. "I just got a very interesting phone call from the city's police union representation," Grant said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. He wasn't smiling. "A man named Dominic Vale. He's their lead counsel. He wanted to give me a courtesy heads-up that one of my senior partners was involved in a highly volatile traffic stop last night." Leora leaned back in her ergonomic chair. The headache behind her temple throbbed. "It wasn't volatile, Grant. It was a speed trap. The officer panicked, drew his weapon, and held me at gunpoint while I tried to hand him my license." Grant's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Were you arrested? Cited?" "No. Mayor Thorne happened to be on the phone with me at the time. He intervened." Grant exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Thorne, of course. Vale mentioned the mayor's inappropriate interference in a routine stop." Leora's mouth tightened. "Vale is a shark. He called me because he's building a narrative. They are going to claim I used my political connections to intimidate an officer who was following standard safety protocols during a high-risk approach." Leora let out a short, bitter laugh. "High risk? I'm a 34-year-old corporate lawyer driving an Audi. The only risk I posed was bleeding on his boots." "I know that. You know that," Grant said, walking over to the window and looking down at the street. "But the union doesn't care about truth. They care about liability. If Thorne pushes to fire this kid, Vale is going to leak a story to the press that the mayor is using his office to get his wealthy friends out of traffic tickets and ruin a young cop's career in the process. And your name will be right in the center of it." Leora stared at the Anderson files. The cynical reality of the situation washed over her, cold and familiar. She was a lawyer. She understood how the machine worked. It wasn't about justice. It was about leverage, optics, and who could afford to weather the storm. Harlan was terrified. But the union wasn't. The union was a highly funded, ruthless machine designed to protect its own at any cost. And right now, Leora was the cost. "They want me to drop it," Leora said flatly. "They want Thorne to back off the disciplinary action, and in return, this all stays out of the papers." Grant turned back to face her. "Vale didn't say that explicitly. But yes, that is the subtext of the courtesy call." Leora stood up. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored them. She walked over to her bag, pulled out her phone, and looked at Grant. "Tell Vale to go to hell," Leora said, her voice dropping into the cold, deadpan register she used to destroy hostile witnesses. "Tell him I am driving over to City Hall right now, and tell him that if he leaks my name to the press, I will personally sue him, his union, and the city for civil rights violations, emotional distress, and gross negligence, and I will do it pro bono on the front steps of the courthouse." Grant didn't flinch. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. "I'll let Rowan know you're canceling your deposition," Grant said softly. "Give them hell, Leora." City Hall was a colossal monument to municipal bureaucracy, built of gray granite and heavy bronze. Inside, the stagnant air smelled of industrial floor wax, damp wool overcoats, and the metallic tang of old radiators. Leora walked through the metal detectors. The security guard, a bored man in a badly fitting uniform, didn't even look up as she grabbed her leather tote. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. The carpet in the executive corridor was thick enough to swallow the sound of her heels. When she pushed open the heavy oak door to the mayor's suite, she found exactly what she expected. Elias Thorne sat at the head of a polished walnut conference table. Across from him sat Dominic Vale. Vale was built like a retired middleweight boxer who had discovered the joys of expensive steakhouses. He wore a navy pinstripe suit that strained across his broad shoulders, smelling faintly of peppermint breath mints and stale cigar smoke. He leaned back, one arm draped over the adjacent seat, radiating the immovable confidence of a man entirely comfortable with institutional blackmail. Neither man noticed Leora in the doorway, And I'm telling you, Elias, it's a bad look, Vale purred. The PBA doesn't want a war. But if you terminate a decorated kid for a high-stress stop just because the driver is on your donor list, the optics are brutal. We issue a joint statement, Harlan gets a reprimand for procedural technicalities, and everyone goes back to work. It wasn't a routine stop, Dominic, Thorne said. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, dark bags under his eyes. He pulled a gun on an unarmed woman. He perceived a threat. Vale countered instantly, leaning forward. It's in his report. She refused a command. She reached for a bag in the dark. What's he supposed to do? Wait to see the muzzle flash? He went home alive. That's the only metric my union cares about. Leora pushed the door until it hit the rubber stopper. Thud. Both men jumped. Vale whipped his head around. Thorne exhaled a long, audible breath of relief. Leora didn't speak. She walked into the room, her face a frozen mask. The terror of the last 10 hours was locked in a suffocating box at the bottom of her stomach. She pulled out a leather chair directly across from Vale. The hinges squeaked. She sat down, placed her tote on the table, and unzipped it. The scrape of the metal zipper sounded incredibly loud. Ms. Kane, Vale said, recovering quickly with a tight, patronizing smile. Dominic Vale. We haven't met. I represent the— I know exactly who you are, Leora interrupted. She didn't look at him. She pulled a legal pad and a silver fountain pen from her bag, lining them up with microscopic precision. You called my managing partner this morning. You attempted to use a localized smear campaign to extort a civilian into dropping a complaint against an armed public servant. Vale's smile evaporated. His jaw hardened. Now hold on. I was making a professional courtesy call. I'm not finished, Leora snapped. She finally looked up. Her eyes were flat, dead, devoid of the polite warmth expected in boardrooms. She stared at him with the exact same unblinking detachment she used to dismantle fraudulent CEOs in federal court. You want to talk optics, Dominic? Let's talk liability, Leora said, her voice dropping to an icy register. By noon, my firm will file a preservation of evidence demand. We want the dashcam, the radio logs, and the GPS telemetry of every cruiser on that highway last night. Vale leaned back, crossing his arms. A muscle twitched near his eye. Standard procedure. You won't find anything that contradicts the officer's report. I don't need to, Leora said smoothly, because my next step is a Monell claim against the city for failure to train and maintaining a pattern of excessive force. I will depose Harlan. I will depose Holt. Then I will depose every instructor at your academy. I will subpoena the union's internal disciplinary records for the last 10 years to prove you systematically shield dangerous officers from termination. You're out of your mind, Vale scoffed, looking at Thorne. Elias, you're letting her threaten the city with a frivolous federal lawsuit. It's not frivolous, and he isn't letting me do anything, Leora said, her voice rising. I am the plaintiff. I have the backing of a 200-lawyer firm that bills $1,000 an hour. We will take this pro bono. We will bury your union in discovery until your legal defense fund is bankrupt. The room went still. The ambient hum of the HVAC unit felt deafening. Vale stared at her. He recognized a bigger, better-funded predator. A corporate firm with unlimited resources, a sympathetic plaintiff, and the mayor as an audio witness. It was a jurisdictional nightmare. You do this, Vale rasped, and Harlan loses his pension. He loses his career over a mistake. He's 24 years old. Leora felt a violent twist in her chest. For a fraction of a second, the icy litigator cracked. She smelled the wet asphalt. She saw the trembling black barrel. He pointed a loaded Glock at my chest because I reached for my driver's license, Leora whispered. The raw emotion in her voice was far more terrifying than the legal threats. He didn't make a mistake. He lost his mind. And he doesn't get to carry a gun in my city anymore. She placed her hands flat on the polished table. They were perfectly steady. You have until the end of the day, Leora said, returning to absolute neutrality. Officer Harlan submits his resignation. The union waives all arbitration rights. If I do not have a signed copy of his resignation in my inbox by 5:01, we file the federal complaint at 5:02. And I promise you, Dominic, I will make sure his name, your name, and the entire transcript of my call with the mayor are on the front page of the Times by Sunday. Leora stood up. Her head pounded. She zipped her tote bag shut. Vale didn't say a word. He stared at the walnut table, his face a mottled red. Leora turned and walked out. She didn't wait for Thorne. She didn't want to hear him contextualize the systemic rot she had just leveraged her privilege to bypass. She rode the elevators to the lobby and pushed through the revolving doors into the bright afternoon. The cold air hit her face, sharp and biting. She stood on the marble steps of City Hall, watching the traffic. She had won. She had neutralized the threat. But wrapped in her expensive wool coat, she didn't feel victorious. She just felt a hollow, cynical dread. She won because she had the mayor's cell number. She won because her firm could bankrupt a police union. If she had been anyone else, a tired mother coming off a double shift, she would just be another statistic. Leora reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers brushed a cold, bizarre-cold smooth cylinder. She pulled it out. It was her favorite silver pen, the one she thought she had left at the courthouse. She stared at it. Her thumb rested on the heavy metal clicker. She pressed it down. Click. The sound was sharp, metallic, precise. It sounded exactly like a thumb safety disengaging. Leora closed her eyes, took a ragged breath of the freezing air, and walked down the steps, disappearing into the crowd.